everything works. This is on.
Okay. Is it okay if I use them? Because I'll pace back and forth.
Do you want a mic?
I mean, sure.
Okay, because all you got to do is
Turn
that's
on.
to turn it on,
Okay.
and if you want to turn it off,
Same button to push it
same
on and off.
button.
Okay.
Mhm.
Because I'll stand closer to the people, and that's great. Thank you.
So
So,
I'm going to close this guy. Museum's over. I pulled up your 5 videos
oh,
Here.
right. Let me
that
see.
you sent me.
That's the first one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
This is the second video you sent me.
Wonderful.
Third video, which you can scroll down. It's kind of a 2-finger
Okay.
scroll. I can help you with it.
Maybe, would you mind helping me a
I
little bit?
can totally help you.
When things, Murphy's Law with me, kind of in technology. So
Yeah.
Anything that can go wrong will go wrong
Yeah.
with me.
We've had a couple tech issues every night, so it is what it is. But honestly, because you're
Okay.
here live, we should be pretty
Okay.
good.
So I'm pushing power right there.
Mm-hmm. You can
And
just leave
power
it
off.
on.
I'll leave it on.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
And I have these that I can
Pass around the audience.
for questions.
And I speak louder this way, maybe they'll hear me better.
Yeah, some people are hard of hearing,
And
and we are recording you.
oh, good.
So we're gonna
You share it,
record
one?
this and put it up
Sure.
on YouTube with the other 2 speakers.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
I love this. This is like a real. This is not. You won't find this in a stage.
Yeah.
They do anything in the
As the background, or do you just want?
later. You could leave that up if you want. It's sort of like
Like the
I
one of
don't-
them hugging?
I don't know if I don't have to.
Yeah, we're standing.
Did you watch them?
I haven't watched
Okay,
them.
so the first one you'll see the guy Mohammed Kunduz is the principal of our youngest school, and he looks like a rock star. He's like long hair and a beard. He's really handsome. Everybody says that.
Yeah, I was told that like when you introduce people to turn the lights down, I was just preparing for that.
You can keep the lights as.
I think we don't even need the lights down because I think we can see pretty well on the screen.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Alright.
Easier for them.
Thank you.
And he
And
plays the oud. You know what the oud is? The oud is an Arabic, Middle Eastern instrument, not just Arabic. It's a little bit like a bouzouki. It's an instrument that has no frets, so it's hard to play. It's a string instrument like a guitar, but
yeah.
it has a very. If you've heard Arabic music, and he's really, really good. And he starts the school day playing you, and he says in Arabic, "Sabah al-khair," good morning, or in Hebrew, "Boker tov." And he's quite a cool guy. And he writes songs. I can tell a joke about him too. He grew up in Jaffa,
Okay.
in Hebrew, and Jaffa in Arabic, and it's part of next to Tel Aviv. It was an Arab city.
Yeah.
Originally there's a port there built by the Romans. It's really old.
Yeah.
There were always Jews living there. He grew up among Arabs, but he got a scholarship to go to Brandeis University. He was a guy, a philanthropist who was an alumni there, and he left money for them to bring one Palestinian from Israel, one is Jew from Israel for a full ride, and grew up in Israel, but in Jaffa, and he comes to Brandeis, which has a lot of Jews, and he gets there and he says, "I've never seen so many Jews in my life." And it was just kind of funny coming from Israel, which is the majority. Anyway, they filmed, and they didn't have a film program there, and they built this film major around him, and he made his thesis was a film about the experience of Palestinian students at Brandeis in a college that's pretty Jewish, about 45% Jewish, and 400 people came to watch the film. He felt really like empowered, and he's done theater, he's done songwriting, he's written, and a film, and he's principal at our school, and we're hoping we don't lose him because
Right,
doesn't get
sounds
paid
like
a lot.
he's a
It's quite
gem.
amazing. His
Yeah.
English is there's a couple of on our website. There's a couple of there's a TED Talk kind of thing that he did, and she talks about the power of education, and he's quite militant and he knows how to really reach people, and kids love him, the parents love him.
It's so good to have educators like that.
Yeah,
When you
yeah.
find them, you keep them.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. All right. All right. I think we're going to get started. Do we want to make sure they're recording? Like, they've started. I don't see anybody up there. We're going to record? Great. We can get started. They gave me the thumbs up. Yeah. All right. Good evening and welcome, everybody. This is our closing night of the Free Palestine Summer Series. Thank you all for joining us. We're really glad to have you. We've had 3 speakers back to back. My name is Emma Abada. I'm one of the co-facilitators of the Free Palestine Summer Series. I'm also somebody who's been out at Ashley Pond for almost 2 years every Saturday protesting for a ceasefire. And part of how this series came about, some of you have been here for the last couple of nights have heard this, but we were protesting and, really concerned and disturbed about the images and the footage we were seeing coming out of Gaza and the level of destruction we were seeing. And we were really devastated and a little bit confused why not as many people were, coming up and talking to us or sharing this kind of concern. And when we did start talking to people, we realized most people don't know a lot of information about Israel and Palestine. And if they do, there can be this tension around it where they're nervous to speak up for Palestinians because they might be accused of anti-Semitism. And so we realized, there's just a lot of either one narrative or just not a lot of information out there. So we really wanted to put this educational series together to bring voices that are not as often heard in the mainstream media to Los Alamos, and just kind of highlight why we were out there, why we've been out there for almost 2 years. And in addition to wanting to educate our community, we also wanted to inspire you. We wanted you to feel something in this educational series so that you don't just learn about what's going on, you do something about it. That was a really important part of why we put on this summer series, because we know that action can actually change the future and change history and the outcome of all of this. And so we've got some handouts up here that we encourage people to take. One looks like this and this, and they've got some suggestions of different things you can be doing, because some people are like, I really am devastated to learn what can I do to help, or how can I get involved. And we've got a long list of things that you can actually do. And the top 2 ones that I want to highlight are, 1, downloading the 5 Calls app. This is an app that makes it super easy for you to call your Congress people. And we encourage people to call them daily. If you don't have it in you to call them daily, pick a day of the week and commit every Sunday, almost like going to church or something. Every Sunday, I'm going to call my representatives and I'm going to ask them for a ceasefire, to let aid into Gaza, to stop the forced starvation, for an arms embargo, and to end this genocide, to end the violence. We don't want our tax dollars going towards a genocide like this. And so really pestering them regularly. Another thing we want to tell you to include when you call them is currently there is a global Samud flotilla, and it's made up of over 50 ships from over 40 countries. And they're currently on their way to Gaza right now to establish a humanitarian aid corridor for the people of Gaza. This is totally legal under international law. However, they've been attacked by drones twice already in Tunisia, which is illegal. And so we really want to be letting our representatives know we're watching them. We want them to have safe passage. We want the people of Gaza to have baby formula and food and water. So that's another thing you can be kind of pestering them about when you call them. The second thing that's really powerful that you can be doing is boycotting. It's a very easy, even an anonymous way that you can nonviolently participate in action that really moves the needle. You can download what's called the No Thanks app, and you can scan barcodes, and it tells you what items are on the boycott list or not. Looking up BDS, which stands for Boycott, Divest, Sanctions, they're an organization that was pivotal in helping turn the tides in apartheid South Africa, and they've got like Chevron and Intel and SodaStream and some big companies that they're targeting for boycotts to help change the situation going on over there. So learn about boycotting, commit to it. I'd argue it's as important or more important than voting is boycotting and calling your representatives regularly. So those are two big ones we want to encourage you to do. I also have Esther here, who is going to make a quick announcement about something going on in Santa Fe.
Thank you so much. I'm over here. Okay. My name is Esther Kavari, and I came here for your interesting program tonight, but I wanted to let you know about something we'll be doing in Santa Fe from October 1st through October 6th. We are going to be reading aloud in public all the names of everybody that has been killed in Gaza since October 1st, 2023. So we're going to include some people that were killed before October 7th, then we'll read the names of all the Israelis that were killed on October 7th, and then all the names of people since then. So we're going to be reading aloud about 63,000 names. It's going to take us about 5 days and nights, and we would like to invite you to participate. We need all of you to come and help us with that. Especially if you're a night owl and you think you'd like to do a night shift, that would be great. The purpose of this is really, it's kind of apolitical. It's really a witnessing, saying those names that we don't know, right? And just bearing witness to these people's lives and deaths. And that's really what it is. In the Netherlands, they did this project, and we learned about it, and we're inspired by that. And it was apparently a very powerful experience for people participating and also for the communities. So I do have, can I hand these out?
And you can put them at the table as well.
Yeah, so if you'd like to take one of those, it has a website where you can fill out a contact form, and once you fill that out, we'll send you a platform, an email where you can, where there's a link where you can sign up for a 2-hour slot. And what we encourage you to do is maybe sign up with a friend or a family member or something, and then you can share that 2-hour slot however you like. We expect to have about 3 or 4 people for every 2-hour slot. So thank you very much. Thank you for coming talk about this, and I hope you can participate. Thank you. It's going to be at the Guadalupe Church in Santa Fe, the Santuario.
Thank you, Esther. All right, so tonight we are honored to introduce Lee Gordon, co-founder and director of Hand in Hand, a pioneering network of integrated bilingual Jewish Arab schools in Israel. Since its founding in 1997, Hand in Hand has grown into a nationally recognized model of shared education, now serving more than 2,000 students and families across Israel. Under Lee's leadership, the schools have become a powerful example of how grassroots initiatives can foster connection, equality, and long-term social change. With decades of experience in nonprofit leadership, cross-cultural dialogue, and community building, Lee Gordon brings a unique perspective on what it takes to create inclusive spaces where coexistence is not just an ideal, but a lived reality. Please join me in welcoming Lee Gordon.
Can everybody hear me well? So first of all, I always explain when I meet people, I have a very crooked smile. 24 years ago, I had a cancerous tumor right on my facial nerve, and they had to yank the nerve out. It hadn't spread, but it would have. So I lost my smile, but I'm very healthy. Just a few words of introduction. I'm Jewish. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, lived in Israel for 20 plus years, almost 21 years. 21 years in Jerusalem. Before that, a year of high school, a year and a half on a kibbutz. When I got to Israel, I come from a real activist family. My parents were active in campaigning against the war in Vietnam, in the civil rights movement. My older brother marched on Washington in 1963. When I got to Israel, I immediately gravitated towards, sort of the biggest contradiction in Israeli society, and that's the divide and conflict between Palestinians and Jews. In 1948, when Israel was founded, a sizable portion of the Palestinian people ended up inside of Israel's borders. So there are Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza under siege or under occupation. There's a diaspora all over the world. There's Palestinian community in this country, Palestinians all over the Arab world. But 22% of Israeli citizens are Palestinian Arabs. Most come from Muslim background, and there's a wide diversity of more religious and more secular Muslims, a sizable Christian Palestinian community. Most are Greek Orthodox, some are Catholic, some are Protestant. A lot of people think of Israel is the Jewish state. It's only Jews, and Israel is in conflict with its Palestinian neighbors and occupying the West Bank and sieging Gaza, but there's a conflict inside of Israel as well. The political experience of Palestinians inside of Israel has been very, very different. They have citizenship, they have de jure, they have by right certain privileges, passports, they can travel freely, but often Palestinians in Israel will talk about themselves as being second-class citizens. They also feel solidarity with their Palestinian cousins in Gaza and the West Bank who are at war and under occupation and suffering tremendously. But their struggle of Palestinians inside of Israel, because this is their home, they've lived there for generations. There are Arab villages in Israel that have been around for hundreds of years, long before Israel was established. So their struggle is for equality, shared society, ideally some solution to the broader conflict. There's a big spectrum. I mean, often white people, tend to look at minorities as thinking all alike. They all vote Democratic, or they're all this way or that way. Palestinians are as diverse as Jews. They're as diverse as the Israeli Jews. One of the things that characterizes the relationship inside of Israel between its Palestinian and Jewish citizens is almost complete separation. There are places in Israel, and this is hard maybe for Americans to understand, there are entire towns or villages where every single person there is Jewish, or another town or village where every single person there is Arab. But there are also mixed cities. Haifa was always an Arab city. There have always been Jews there. It's a mixed city. Jerusalem is sort of a divided city. It's part Palestinian, part Jewish. Jaffa, which is the ancient part of Tel Aviv, which has been around for 2,000 years, is a mixed city. There's also a city called Akko, or in Arabic, Akka. Even in mixed cities where Palestinians and Jews are living physically close to one another, there's very little contact. That separation is the most profound in the school system. Since 1948, there have been separate tracks. There was a public school system for Arabs, and the language of instruction is Arabic. A public school system for Jews, the language of instruction is Hebrew. In the Jewish system, there are secular schools and what they call modern Orthodox schools where they have extra Jewish content. In 1948, the Israeli government, in their infinite wisdom, quote unquote, viewed the Palestinians who lived inside of Israel as an enemy, as a fifth column. And so they, for people who often don't know this, from 1948 to 1966, even though Palestinians had citizenship, they were under military control. Most Israeli Jews don't know this history. In order to leave their village, they had to get permission from a local officer. They were citizens and could vote, but they couldn't travel freely. In 1966, the military control was gotten rid of, and they were able to travel freely. The second in charge of the Arab track in the Ministry of Education was always someone from the Shin Bet, the Israel security forces. And they made sure that anybody appointed to any position of influence would not be a rabble-rouser. And there was a funny thing that happened during the Oslo Accords in 1992, when there were some more liberal ministers of education. Jewish schools were allowed to teach the poetry of the Palestinian national poet Mahmoud Darwish, but the Israeli government wouldn't allow Palestinians to study their own poet in their schools. I mean, it was real like control. Things have loosened up a little bit. In 1997, for 2 years, I was in a fellowship program that gave me time to create new initiatives. It was called the School for Educational Leadership. And one of the things that it did was expose us to schools. I had worked as a community center director and a social worker, but never really worked in schools. And I started viewing schools as a wonderful venue to bring Palestinians and Jews together from a young age. I had done lots and lots of dialogue work at the university. Arabs and Jews would come together and talk, and dialogue is always good, but it was very, very superficial, and there was no real social change from that. But I created this model of if we could build an integrated school setting and have kids from a young age learn together, become bilingual in Hebrew and Arabic, bring their parents along for the ride, we could maybe make some kind of lasting impact on this divide and this conflict. I knew as an Israeli Jew that I didn't have the legitimacy to go to an Arab community and recruit Arab parents to send their kids, so I needed an Arab colleague. I was introduced to my co-founder by a man who later became a member of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, from a left-wing, primarily Palestinian party called Balad. This man's name was Jamal Zahalka. And I met this young man, Amin Khalaf. We met at the YMCA, which is the only YMCA in the world where the majority of people who go there are Jewish. And there's this, it's an old ancient building, and on the floor as you walk into the door, there's this marble inscription that says something along the lines of those who pass this threshold leave their religious, national, cultural differences behind and come in here as equals. We went there because it has really good coffee, mostly. I presented this idea of building a model of an integrated bilingual school to Amin, and he told me, you could have saved your 20 minutes, I'm with you, and I've been thinking of this the same. And he told me this story. He grew up in a very small Palestinian-Israeli village in the north, near the border of the West Bank. Very poor village. They didn't have electricity until he was 10 years old. They used generators. His parents were pretty much illiterate. They maybe went through 8th grade. He was able to go to he's a Muslim, secular Muslim, but he went to a premier Christian high school in Nazareth, came to Hebrew University in Jerusalem, did a BA in Middle Eastern Studies and a master's. But he told me the first time he met a Jew, eye to eye, was when he was 19 years old, and he felt very sort of impotent. He felt intimidated. His Hebrew wasn't great. He felt like, I grew up in this tiny village. I'm a minority. Here's this Jewish sort of hegemony. And he said, I don't want my son to wait until he's 19 to meet a Jew and feel equal. His son was in our very first class and graduated, went from kindergarten through high school, graduated in 2011. We both lived in Jerusalem, and we knew we wanted to have a model in Jerusalem, but we were also worried that this wouldn't succeed. This had never been done before. So we wanted to have a backup. So we spent the better part of November 1997 through February 1998 traveling around the country, meeting. We went twice a week, mostly to the north of Israel, to an area called the Galilee, in Arabic, Jalil, meeting with town mayors, high school principals, parents, community activists. The vast majority of people said, this is a wonderful idea, having Jews and Arabs go to school together, but it'll never work. Jewish and Arab parents will never send their kids to school. There's too much history of conflict, fear, violence, ignorance. A few people said, it's a crazy idea and it probably won't work, but you should go for it. And we decided to listen to them more. And we spent, starting in February, we had to recruit teachers, parents, and we were coming to parents and asking them in a way, not knowing how to swim, to jump into the swimming pool in the middle of the night with no lights on. That's what we were asking them to do. We're asking them to take a chance. The only thing we could promise them was that at any time you want to take your kids out, you can take them out and send them to your Arab school or your Jewish school. In February, we decided we were going to have our first meeting in the north, in the Galilee, and it was in the mayor's office of a small Palestinian town called Kaukab Abu el-Hajja. And the town was named after a Muslim general who defeated the Crusaders in one of the battles. The Crusaders invaded the Middle East. Many of the Christians and Palestinians are descendants of these Crusaders who lived there and intermarried. And anyway, we had this meeting there, and we had planned it weeks in advance. We hired 2 young actresses, one Jewish, one Palestinian from Bethlehem, who would do bilingual theater, and we wanted to show how they can speak Arabic and Hebrew, but make each other understood. It was a real stormy night, literally. It was thunderstorm. The meeting was called for 8:30. Meetings start late in Israel. At 8:35, there were 7 people in this room. And I was saying, well, it's a stormy night. We'll come back in 3 weeks and do it again. At 8:55, there were 150 people crowded in this room that were standing in the hallways. And it was a very lively, very heated discussion Remember, we invited the mayors. There was a Jewish mayor of this regional council and 2 Arab mayors of the Arab towns. And one of them got up at about 10:30 and said, you know, we're a group of Jewish and Arab people talking here together with a really heated argument. That in and of itself is an accomplishment. It just doesn't happen. Let's take this energy and make this school a reality. We didn't have a single parent. We hadn't hired teachers. We hadn't found a location. But I had this kind of gut emotional reaction that we crossed a certain threshold, a kind of aha moment, and I knew we were going to open this school. So a lot of weeks and months and a lot of work later, on September 1st, we started 2 schools. Each school had 1 class. In Jerusalem, we had a kindergarten of 25 students, roughly half Palestinian, half Jewish. We were given space in an existing magnet school to grow the school because we couldn't get a building for 1 class. In the Galilee, we had 1 first grade class with 32 students. The model was that kindergartens move up to first grade, a new kindergarten class. The first graders move to second grade, a new first grade class. That happened year after year. In 2003, we opened a 3rd school in an Arab village. It's the only place in Israel where Jewish students are going into an Arab community to go to school. This year, we have just under 2,200 students in 6 campuses across the country. We get, now, I'll tell you maybe anecdotally, I don't like Donald Trump, but I want federal funding to come to public schools in Oregon, in New Mexico, wherever. Kids need to go to school. We couldn't afford to have a school that was only private, and our parents in Israel, there aren't many private schools, parents can't afford that. And we knew that we couldn't be 100% dependent on philanthropy. One of my jobs now is to raise money for it, and we do raise a lot of money, but we needed some public support. So we were able to go to the professionals in the Ministry of Education, not the political leadership that comes and goes. Since Hand in Hand has been founded, we've had 10 different ministers of education and many different prime ministers, from ultra-right, usually the case, to sort of centrists, which is much more right-wing than you might think. But we found professionals who had their fingers on budgets, and we were able to start with 1 teacher here, 1 teacher there. So we've been able to get funding from public sources, which enables us to keep our schools open. We also found local municipal leaders who are much more practical. I mean, the national government, the ministers, are highly ideological. They're the ones who are, promoting more war and more ethnic cleansing in Gaza, and this recent attack on Qatar and an attack on Iran, et cetera. Professionals and local politicians have voters they have to answer to, and they often have Palestinian voters and Jewish voters. And so we've gotten support from mayors, and that's enabled us to have keep our schools going without charging very high fees. The fees range from $800 a year to $1,500 a year at our Jerusalem school. Most of our schools, 5 of our 6 schools, have preschools. The kids are starting in Haifa, which was the 4th school we opened. We started with 18 toddlers, 2 to 3-year-olds. By the time they got to the point where they were learning how to read and write, they spoke fluent Hebrew and Arabic, and that school has the strongest bilingualism. And just by the way, starting in 3rd grade, all of our students start learning English. So if you walked into a 7th through 12th grade classroom, you could speak Hebrew, Arabic, or English. The kids write in all those languages. But the bilingual piece is not just so they learn 2 languages. I mean, those of you who speak a second language, you know that when you speak someone's language, you open doors. People are much more willing to share with you. I speak fluent Hebrew, some Arabic, a lot of Spanish. When I travel to places in Latin America and I speak in Spanish, I often don't hear the answer, but I think it's a sign of respect. Arabic is a wonderful language. It's also very complex, much more difficult than Hebrew. There's a formal form of Arabic called Fusha, which is the language of the Quran. It's written Arabic. Traditionally, spoken Arabic is not written. So in Tunisia, where the Arabic is quite different than it is in Iraq and different than Palestinian Arabic, they all read the same Arabic. Our Jewish kids are not really becoming super fluent in reading and writing, but they're speaking. The Arab kids speak Hebrew fluently. Our schools are political. They're not political in terms of we don't take positions, but anytime you bring a Palestinian and a Jew together, it's political. There's resistance to what we're doing. We've had in Jerusalem over the years a lot of graffiti attacks. written, spray painted on the walls of the building. And in Jerusalem, the buildings are made out of stone. So when you spray paint, you can't just paint over it, you have to sandblast it. Usually it's in Hebrew, Mavet la'aravim, which means death to Arabs. Ein du-kiyum im sartan, there's no coexistence with cancer. The worst incident was in November 2014, the Saturday after Thanksgiving here. 3 young men, right-wing Jews, Orthodox Jews from a movement called Lahava, which means flame. They are the followers of the late Rabbi Meir Kahana, who was an extreme racist, who was one of the early people talking about ethnic cleansing. They spray painted the walls and they set fire to the school. It was a Saturday night. They took the backpacks that the kids leave in school in the first grade and did a bonfire. No one was hurt. That night, some very good things came out of this, besides the fact that it was kind of very scary. That Sunday is a school day. Our school week is Sunday through Thursday. The Christian Arabs are the smallest religious group, and we couldn't have a 4-day week, so Friday is the Muslim Sabbath, and Saturday is Jewish Shabbat. We couldn't have, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. About 300 people came to the school, parents and high school students, because they had to figure out where the first graders going to go to school, and they reorganized the high school classrooms so the first graders could study there, and for 6 weeks while they were repairing the damage, the high schoolers studied in the hallway. There was a young Arab mother wearing a hijab. It was her first year in the school. Her daughter was in kindergarten or first grade, and at the beginning of the evening, she said, "I'm coming here to help, but I have to take my daughter out of the school. I don't want her to be a target." She was very fearful. At the end of the evening, she got so much support and felt so much solidarity. She said, "There's nowhere else for my daughter to be. This is our home." The next morning, about 1,000 people showed up at the beginning of the school day out of solidarity, including people that you wouldn't think. There were a group of high school boys from a religious Jewish boys' school who came, and there's a lot of these people who carry out these attacks. They do something in Hebrew. It's called tag mechir, which means a price tag. And they say, this is the price you're going to pay if you dismantle Jewish settlements in the West Bank. We're going to torch your building. They torched the monastery. So these young high school students came with a play on words. They said, tag me'ir. Me'ir means to shed light. So they're bringing a sign that they're shedding light instead of a price. On Friday, which is not a school day, our school is on a kind of what used to be the old train tracks in Jerusalem, and now it's a walking promenade where people walk their dogs and run and ride their bikes. About 15,000 people came. We didn't call it a protest, we call it a parade, but they came out of solidarity with our school, and at the school, when they came in, the school is really quite beautiful with courtyards. It's very Middle Eastern looking, and there were face paintings and magicians. It was a real happening for kids. 3 6th graders were interviewed by Israeli television news, and I think they were a mixed group of Jews and Palestinians. And the interviewer interviewed this one young man in 6th grade who was Palestinian, and they said, well, why do you think these people torched your school? And he said, well, they just don't think that Jews and Arabs should go to school together. And he said, well, what do you think they should do to them as punishment? And you'd think he would say, well, they should beat the shit out of them or put them in jail. And he said, no, they should make them come and volunteer in our school, and they would understand what we're doing is really important. Now, I like to think that sort of empathy and compassion, it could have come a little bit from his parents, but I think it came from the school, him growing up there, that he didn't want revenge. He said, I want to win those people over. Now, these 3 young men probably can't be won over. They went to jail, they were caught on video, and afterward they were let out of jail for 3 years. One of them was interviewed by a right-wing television station, and he said he'd do it again. But a lot of people can be won over, and I'll give you some examples from our school. At the very beginning, the core group of parents who come are usually middle class, politically active, and they really they feel this is a mission. They want to change Israeli society, but they want their kids to get a good education. As the schools have grown, and we've gotten prizes, they do really well academically, they're very progressive in terms of our curriculum, people are coming because it's a good school. And I think the bottom line is you can't recruit many parents just based on ideology. They want to be sure that their kid is getting a good education. And there are parents who come, and when I go to parents' meetings, when I am in Israel, you see that we're not preaching to the choir. This is the 4th war between Israel and Hamas since Hand in Hand was founded. This is 1,000,000 times worse, but in 2014, over 1,000 Palestinians were killed. You can say Palestinians started with rockets, the Israelis started with a siege. The point is that when the Jewish and Arab parents come together, you'll hear parents saying things like this. Jewish parents saying, of course we don't want innocent Palestinians to suffer, but they were throwing rockets at us, we have to respond. And you'll hear Palestinian parents saying, of course we don't want rockets falling on Israel, but if Israel didn't have a siege on Gaza, there'd be no need for the rockets. Now that makes me feel good because it means that people come with a lot of baggage. We've also found that the kids have a really easy time with this. They grew up together, this is what they know, this is their normal. They know from a very early age that the rest of society, that they're in a little bit of a bubble, and the rest of society is not a rose garden. Although we don't use the term bubble, we use the term incubator. They're an incubator. The parents did not go to school together, don't spend a lot of time together, so the hardest group that we have to work with are the parents, partly because they're older, and the older you get, the harder it is to change. But what keeps this together is they have this common denominator, this common interest. They want their kids to get a good education. I think that that's the base for a lot of partnership building, that you can't just bring people artificially on the street, come together, let's dialogue. You got to build some kind of common ground, and education is common ground. The environment is common ground. Creating safe communities is common ground. I want to talk to you about October 7th and how it's impacted, and the war, how it's impacted us. So many of our, in Israel, there's mandatory military service for Jews. Men serve for 2 years and 9 months, although if they become officers, they serve longer. Women for 1 year and 9 months. It's been an institution since 1948. There's a lot of conformity in Israel. It's very hard, even for left-wing Israelis, to avoid doing the army. There's more and more of a group of young men and women who are refusing to go in the army. In our schools, we've had quite a few high school graduates on the Jewish side who have refused to go. A couple have gone to jail, but others have gotten out of it and done national service where they work in schools or hospitals. But some do go. One of our graduates, who graduated maybe in 2019, served his military service, and then men and women get called into the reserves. So, and a lot of times they put themselves in harm's way. Some of them are doing horrible things, but they're also Israeli soldiers getting killed. He was killed in Gaza in January of 2014. Probably they were trying to demolish a building with booby traps, and the building fell on them and killed 20 Israeli soldiers. But he was killed there. It was very hard for the Palestinian graduates. They were a friend of his in school, but when he put on the uniform, it was very, very hard for them to feel respect. They mourned his death, but they don't know if they came to his funeral. One of the Israeli hostages, young man who was kidnapped at the Nova electronic music dance festival, Nova Festival. He was then later killed in captivity by Hamas. His cousins go to school at our school, and he's visited our school. The grandmother of a student of ours in Haifa, a school in Haifa, on her kibbutz, was killed on October 7th. And there's an article, wonderful article, about how the son says, I choose the path of partnership and not revenge. And probably 150 of our Palestinian families have relatives in Gaza, many of whom have been killed, many of whom they lost contact with. We're going to see a video about someone, but it touches everybody. And as you can imagine, that's what parents, teachers, and older kids are talking about. But after October 7th, schools across Israel were closed for 3 weeks. When they started to reopen schools, we were worried that a lot of parents, especially on the Jewish side, would take their kids out of our school. We had 2,050 parents that school year, 23-24, and only 10 didn't come back to school. If we had been started that year, if we founded Hand in Hand that year, we would have dissolved. But we have trained this muscle. We know how to deal with disagreement. We know how to, and like I said, the kids have an easy time, but we didn't take things for granted. When we brought parents together, we brought in a Palestinian and a Jewish group facilitator, and we do a kind of, this is what we do all discussions like. People sit in a big circle. It's kind of, we do a round robin. Everybody has a chance to speak before someone else. And we tell people, when you speak about yourself. I feel this way. This affects me this way. You don't say, you Arabs think like this, or you Jews think like this. And there's a tendency to do that in Israeli society. After everybody speaks, there can be some crosstalk. And I'll just tell you something. This grandmother who was killed on October 7th on her kibbutz. It was a very left-wing kibbutz, and she was quite a left-winger. In Jewish tradition, when someone dies, you sit shiva, which means you sit for 7 days in a house of mourning. And a number of the Arab parents from the grandson's class said they want to come to the shiva, the mourning ceremony, but they were worried that they wouldn't be welcome there. And so they called up and spoke with the man's wife, the man whose mother was killed. And she said, of course, you're our friends, come. And there were 30 Arab, mostly mothers, who came. You don't see that. You don't see, on the Palestinian side, you don't see very many Jews mourning Palestinians. It happens, and I think that it's created a culture of, we can be together in this. We have our differences, but we can build some kind of common ground. I'm going to show a film, if I can. The first film it's just short. It's a 2.5-minute film, but I want you to notice this I think it's the one, very handsome young man. He's a Palestinian Israeli named Mohammed Kunduz, and he is the principal at our youngest school, which is called Aleph Bet, which Aleph is a play on words, and it's Aleph Bet means the alphabet. It's words in the letters A, B, but Aleph also means one, and Bet means house. So it's called the Aleph Bet School, and he starts the morning. He plays. There's an Arabic, Middle Eastern instrument called the oud. Any of you know what an oud is? It looks a little bit like a bouzouki. It's a string, like a guitar instrument, but with no frets, so it's very hard to play, like a violin. And he's a virtuoso oud player. And he starts the morning playing the oud and saying to the kids as they walk through the gates, Boker Tov, which is good morning in Hebrew, Sabach al-Khair, which is good morning in Arabic. He's a star, and the people really love him, but I want to make sure it's the right one. Yes, perfect. It's mostly in English.
Hello, welcome to our school, Yad B'Yad. My name is Nai Mansour. I live in Tira and I'm 8 years old. Hello, my name is Yuval. I'm 8 years old. I live in Moshav Hagol. Me and Yuval were in the same class. I am Jewish and Nai is Arabic, and I like to learn from my friends who are different from me. I like art, especially drawing. I like math because it's a lot of science and it's really interesting. This is our classroom. In our school, we celebrate Jewish and Arabic holidays. Sometimes in the holidays, we teach the younger kids. It's fun and I feel like older. This is where we do our morning circle. What's special at our school that we both Arabic and Jewish learn together. I really like to learn Arabic because it's interesting and it's like a new language and I like to discover it.
Being part of an integrated bilingual school gives our students the opportunity to see the other as a partner and not as an enemy. In our school, we put emphasis on critical thinking. We allow our students to ask questions, explore in order to find themselves. Being part of this family fills me with joy, fills me with responsibility. I love coming here every morning to join these kids, to learn from them, to be part of this social revolution in order to make a better future.
We represent a minority in Israel. There are a lot of polls, and polls are not very accurate in general, and especially during wartime, but there are polls that show that 70% of Israeli Jews think that it's all right to completely destroy a town in Gaza. There are many people in Israel that think that too much aid is going into Gaza. We have to stop the aid. There are groups in Israel that have hijacked aid trucks going into Gaza and taken the flour and the rice and the oil and dumped them on the ground. So But I kind of believe, I think Gandhi, either Gandhi or Che Guevara said something like that victory is in the struggle itself. So I don't have any illusions that sometime soon there's going to be some kind of solution so that between the river and the sea, all people can live free, whether it's a one-state solution or a no-state solution or a two-state solution. We're so far away from that. But I believe that you need, in times like this, and we've got the same thing happening in our country, that you need to have models of sanity and models of partnership and models of democratic sort of community. One thing I didn't mention is that every place we have a school, we have a paid community organizer who works with adults, starting with the parents of the kids, but other adults. And we have about 4,000 Jewish and Arab adults who come together from regularly to semi-regularly for all kinds of programming, sometimes independent of the kids. Dialogue groups, community gardens, PTA meetings, discussion groups, classes. For many of these parents, they find that hand-in-hand is kind of like a safe refuge. And I'll give you some examples. After October 7th, many of our Arab parents told their kids, when you go out in public, don't speak Arabic, speak Hebrew. They were really worried that they would get lynched or attacked. There have been some cases, not with our kids. There have been things where Arabs in Israel have posted simple things on Facebook or Instagram saying, we don't want innocent civilians in Gaza to be killed, and they get called in by the police saying that they're fomenting terror. Jews have a little bit of a green light to do those kinds of things, but so our schools are a place where people can really feel safe to speak their mind, be unjudged, and I think that there are some people in Israel now, because things are so dark and difficult, those who are opposed to the war, they find hand-in-hand a safe place. Many of our older students, our high school students, and our parents are involved politically in other organizations. There's an organization in Israel called Standing Together, which is Palestinian Jewish, mostly young adults. And they do a lot of things. One of the things they did is after these attacks by these extremist settlers who hijacked aid trucks, they started accompanying the aid trucks with their cars to protect them, to make sure. And right now, there's not a lot of aid going in. Israel's not letting much aid. They're only letting aid in run by these mercenary American corporation. But we're not working in the West Bank. We're not working in Gaza. I mean, our schools by themselves are not stopping this, the atrocities and the ethnic cleansing in Gaza. I also want to mention that while this is going on in Gaza, I mean, for the ultra-right in Israel, the Hamas attack and the war was like a godsend because they're running rampant in the West Bank. We don't hear about this, but 1,000 Palestinians have been killed, some of them in clashes, some of them have been armed, but many are killed because settlers come and do what, I don't know if you know the term pogrom. A pogrom was in the early 1800s, early 1900s, anti-Semitic people in Tsarist Russia and in Poland would come and attack Jewish communities and kill people. That prompted a lot of immigration of Jews to the United States. My father came here in 1920. So they carried out almost like pogroms, stealing sheep from shepherds, burning olive trees. I mean, a lot of these villages are agricultural. There's an organization called the Jewish Center for Nonviolence, in which Jews go to Israel and live in there's a few communities in the West Bank that are under demolition order. They're usually these small communities, and the Israeli army say they need it for a firing range. And they've gone to the courts, and the courts have held it up. But villages are getting really, people are getting deported from their villages, and houses are being, and that's happening all over the West Bank. And the government is not enforcing this. The army stands by, or if anything, helps the settlers. There are cases where a settler will come in and beat up a Palestinian, and then they arrest the Palestinian. I don't know if any of you heard of this movie. It won the Oscar. Is it called No Other Land? So it was two Palestinian producer-directors and two Jewish Israeli-Palestinian director-producers. One of the directors was beaten up in his village, arrested, held handcuffed outside in the winter outside the police station, and then let go. Complete harassment. I mean, no charges filed or anything like that. That happens a lot. Most Israelis could know about this, but they refuse to learn about it. I mean, Israelis can easily watch Al Jazeera, even though they closed down the station in Israel. They can watch CNN, but they choose not to know. Or if they know, they say, "Well, it's not true. There's no starvation." I think some of those people, though, are people that you can reach, and I think that one way to reach them is to have dialogue. And I think that my view that the government is who we have to be fighting against, but not necessarily people who voted for that government. People who are attacking, the settlers in the West Bank, some of them are too far gone and too extreme. They're not going to change their ways. the people who voted for Netanyahu, the same way that many people who voted for Donald Trump, there's a small base that hate Jews, hate women, hate black people, hate immigrants, but a lot, you can't say that half this country is like that. So how do you reach them? Our parents are trying to do that out in the wider community. We're doing it a little bit in our schools, even though the parents who choose to send their kids already have a little bit of open-mindedness. Maybe I'll stop for a second and see if there's any questions. If you ask loudly, I'll repeat the question. I think I can hear if anybody has. Yes? Yeah, standing together.
I didn't quite understand the story that you told about the Israelis from Standing Together who defended the trucks going into Gaza. Could you tell that story again?
Yeah, it's one of the things they did. There was a time before March of this year when Israel was allowing, not enough, but they were allowing food trucks to go to bring in, mostly it was staples like rice, oil, cooking oil, canned food, flour. Sometimes these trucks started in Jordan, where they were filled up in Jordan and drove across Israel. And Israel is a small country. And many times, some of these trucks were literally stopped by cars. These armed thugs got on the trucks and threw the food off. So Standing Together, one of the things they started doing is they organized volunteers to come with their cars, driving in front and behind the trucks. And, some of them are armed too, because Jews in Israel can carry guns if they wanted to. I think they probably chose not to. The trucks aren't going in now anymore. I mean, I know that food now, there's a way to contribute money to food organizations in Gaza, and they're mostly getting food from the small number of farms that are there and small numbers of commercial trucks that go in and sell things to local store owners. Standing Together does a lot of other things. But I want to tell you something. I know that you talked about BDS. So the BDS movement is broad. It's not one small organization, but there are divides there. And I think that we should be pushing to end arms sales to Israel, boycotting institutions that promote this. Sometimes, though, Israeli artists, filmmakers who are very progressive and bring stories of Palestinians get boycotted too. But part of the BDS movement came out against Standing Together because they're against any kind of normalization. We can't deal with anything that's Israeli. And it sort of leaves out, there are, close to 2 million Palestinians who live in Israel, and it leaves them out. It leaves them out. They can't get funding. And I think it's usually people outside of Israel who don't realize that there need to be practical solutions sometimes inside. There are basically every Saturday night, there are hundreds of thousands of Israelis who are protesting for a ceasefire. Now, many of them, if not most of them, are not thinking primarily of the suffering and the killing of 63,000 Palestinians. They're thinking of the hostages, or maybe 20 more. But more and more anti-war and pro-Palestinian solidarity people are coming to these protests and saying, this whole war is about decimating the Palestinians, and we have to think about them as well. So there are movements like that, and they need to be supported. People get arrested all the time. The Palestinians who come to the demonstrations feel safer when they're around Jews who can kind of protect them, the way maybe immigrants might feel safe if people in a sanctuary city will surround them and prevent ICE from coming in and kidnapping them and taking them, whisking them off to some prison. What started until October 7th for 44 weeks, there were weekly demonstrations on Saturday night across Israel, and they were demonstrating against what in Israel is called the judicial overhaul. The Likud and right-wing government of Israel under Netanyahu was trying to pass a law that allowed the parliament to overrule the Supreme Court. Picture the Supreme Court ruling that you can't discriminate against black people in housing. And then the Congress says, of course we can. A white person should be allowed to not rent to a black person. That was the equivalent. What a lot of people in Israel didn't admit was the reason they wanted to do that is because they want to annex the West Bank. The Supreme Court a little bit was putting a brake on some of the worst kind of policies that the Israeli government was doing in the West Bank. And so people, I was at some of these demonstrations, people would come with signs that said, no democracy with occupation, or we have to fight for Palestinian rights along with fighting for democratic rights inside of Israel. At first, the organizer of the demonstration says, don't water down the message, that's not our message. But gradually they kept on coming, and gradually over time, that message was being heard a little bit more. October 7th happened on Saturday, and then that sort of all stopped, and everybody kind of mostly were in shock, rallied around the flag. It was very, the war started, and it, within about 3 weeks, thousands of Palestinians had already been killed, and thousands of homes had been demolished. There was a ceasefire in March, until March, and then Netanyahu broke the ceasefire unilaterally and went back to war, and now they're trying to get people, clean all the Palestinians out of Gaza City and move them farther south. There's a wing of the Israeli government that wants to settle in Gaza. And Netanyahu says, well, that's not our intention. We want to just control Gaza. I mean, these are the same people that, I talked about I'll give you an example. The Minister of Police, Itamar Ben-Gvir, way before he got into politics, he was a lawyer. He volunteered to be the pro bono lawyer of the 3 young men that set fire to our school. Now he's the Minister of Police, so he's got a lot of power and a big following. More questions? Yes? Okay.
Your website.
Oh, yes.
I actually like your jaw because you're almost disgusting. And I thought you had purposely done this just to look kind of, this whole...
Tough kind of?
Well, that this is just awful situation. It's nothing to smile about. So I actually like this.
Okay, thank you.
I think this is a great
photo. Thank you.
Second thing is a question. Do you ever get fist fights among your students?
I hear this from the principals. Compared to other Israeli schools, there's a lot less bullying. There's some in our schools. Israeli schools are pretty rambunctious. There's a lot of, mostly you call your teacher by their first name and not teacher. The conflicts among kids are almost entirely not related to Palestinian Jewish Arab. They're about other things. Boys,
right. The
and it's usually among boys.
People,
the girls are much more empathic and much more, and they're much more mature generally. Boys playing soccer, what's called football there. I'll give you a funny story. So when the very first year of Hand in Hand, Arab schools in Israel have been sort of traditionally underfunded, and Arab society tends to be more conservative socially, respect for authority. So in Arab schools, what they call their teachers, they say malimti, which means my teacher, my teacher. In Jewish schools, they call them Yafa or Lee or Roy or whatever. Arab schools, this happened a lot, that in high schools, a lot of science and engineering fields were closed off to Arabs because they didn't serve in the army. In the army, if you served in the army, what you did in the army, that was like your resume. And so you had in Arab junior highs and high schools teachers with PhDs in chemistry, biology, and they didn't want to be teachers. They wanted to work in high tech or something like that. And so they weren't great teachers. They weren't motivated. It's changed a lot. But traditionally, Arabs get, lots of work to do. In our school, the first year, the Arab parents started complaining, first graders. They started saying, why aren't you giving our kids, you're not giving our kids enough homework. And the Jewish parents were saying, you're giving our kids too much homework. And then you had these teachers that would say to the kids, to me, they'd say, I wish the Jewish kids could become more like the Arabs and the Arab kids could become more like the Jews, because they wanted the Arab kids to be less formal and they wanted the Jewish kids to be more disciplined. And I think that's kind of worked itself out. There's never, as far as I know, there's never been any real violence in our schools. The parents will argue, but can then go out and have coffee or beer together afterwards. And that's developed over the years. Right. Yes. Here.
About a year ago in the New Yorker, there was a profile of a community, maybe near Haifa, I can't remember, where there were Palestinian Israelis and Palestinian Jews living together. I think it's a pretty well-known community. Neve Shalom, that's it, right? And it was, they were discussing the really very serious tensions in that community after October 7th. And it seemed like it was maybe actually falling apart as a community. And obviously they had a school there, I think, also. Right, so I just wonder, it sounds from what you're saying that hasn't manifested in the same way in your schools, so maybe you can explain the difference.
So in Israel, halfway between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, there's an intentional community founded over 40 years ago called Neve Shalom. In Arabic, it's Wahat al-Salam, which means oasis of peace. My old synagogue that I grew up is called Neve Shalom. It was founded by young couples and single people, Jews and Arabs, who came there and they wanted to build this sort of, and they got land from a monastery, the Latrun, and they're Trappist Catholics, and they have not been able to grow because the government won't give them land. Most land in Israel is controlled by the government. So they grew, they had kids, they started an elementary school for their kids. Part of the reason there's been tension is they're like living together, and one thing that happened well over 30 years ago, there was an accident of 2 Israeli army helicopters, Air Force helicopters, that were flying back to Lebanon when Israel was still occupying Lebanon, and they collided with each other and everybody got killed. And one of the young men who got killed was from Neve Shalom. And his father, his name was Tom Kitian, on the basketball court wanted to build a little memorial for his son. And there was a lot of resistance among the Arabs there because, he said he died in the army and the army is occupying us. And it was really difficult for him. He's mourning his son and he thought it would be a no-brainer, but there's tension like that. I mean, I think that we maybe have it easier because we're not living together. We're cities, we're schools, and the parents go home to their home communities but I think Neve Shalom hasn't, I think there's been a lot of tension. I don't think it's fallen apart. I think that it's, October 7th and the war there were a lot of Israelis, even on the left, who sort of became much more defensive and protective of Israel. I think that's changed, but it took a long time for many of them to change, and some of them haven't changed. Some of them, we have this friend in Portland, an Israeli woman who she always considered herself a leftist, and then she was over at our house and she says, they're all Hamas, they're all Hamas. It's like Hamas is not all the Palestinians, Netanyahu is not all the Israeli Jews, and Trump is not all the people who voted for him. There are a lot of reasons, The Democrats screw up too and maybe are too elite and don't understand how to reach people. But it doesn't mean it's easy. I think there are other organizations that aren't maybe as intense or they haven't been around as long, that have maybe fallen apart. But I want to tell you also, like in the Jewish community in this country, Israel, first of all, it's not just Jews, but Israel has been such a hot emotional Israel way before this. There are synagogues where rabbis refuse to even talk about Israel because it divides people. There are people who can be super progressive about everything, but when it comes to Israel, there's even an expression, PEP or PEI, progressive except for Palestine, or progressive except for Israel. I know rabbis who, we need to support Israel. We need to send money to the IDF, but they're out there demonstrating against ICE. But I like talking with people like that because I think that exposing them to Palestinian voices is really important. There's an organization that still exists in Israel called Encounter, and it's an organization that's geared towards when Jewish leaders, community leaders come to Israel for whatever their missions, to get them to spend a day or a night or a weekend with Palestinians, to get them to hear voices. They go to Bethlehem. This was done in more peaceful times, in Bethlehem, in Ramallah, East Jerusalem. And it sometimes opens their mind up. I think that people can change. They may not be writing their congressman and telling them to stop funding arms to Israel, but and then a lot of people see hand in hand as a really good, they say, well, it's in this country we should have integration, why shouldn't it be in Israel, But I want to talk about some terminology too. So a lot of people in the pro-Palestinian movement define Zionism as a settler colonialist movement, as the people who are ethnically cleansing Gaza, bombing and killing thousands of innocent Palestinians. Zionism was always, it went from right to left. And in the 1920s and 30s in Israel, before the establishment of the state, there was a minority voice in the Zionist movement called Brit Shalom, which means covenant of peace. They believed in a binational state. They said we do not have to have a separate Jewish state. We have to have a state where Palestinians and Jews can be part of this society. I mean, it could be, if there was a one-state solution, and there was, it would take a long time for Palestinians and Israelis to reconcile. And there are people like that still. I mean, that people that hand in hand, some call themselves Zionists, but in their view, Zionism means, a place where Jews can be free, but from the river to the sea, both Jews and Palestinians should be free. Other Zionists say it's a win-lose situation, and we have to be on our guard, and they're out to get us, just like it's been a continuous 2,000-year history. They're out to kill the Jews, and it happened in the Holocaust, and all this anti-Semitism on campuses. But I want to kind of caution people that you can talk with people who might define themselves as Zionists, but it doesn't necessarily mean what you... other things, for example, I'm really supportive of this guy running for mayor in New York City, named Zohran Mamdani, who may well win. He's all of 34 years old. He's younger than my older son. He's ahead in the polls. If Eric Adams doesn't drop out, then he's probably going to win. If he does, he's going to fight against Cuomo. He's made statements that some Jews in New York, it scares them off a little bit. He's spoken in synagogues. The comptroller of the city of New York is a Jewish guy named Brad Lander, who endorsed him, campaigning together. You can be, 150% pro-Palestinian doesn't make you anti-Semitic. And there is anti-Semitism on the left as well. Now you can say that some of it is exacerbated by Israel's policies. In France, where there's a much smaller number of Jews, a lot of the anti-Semitic incidents have been carried out by North Africans who are angry at Israel, and so they lump Jews together. Now, anybody who's racist, or if they do a racist incident or anti-Semitic first of all, they're to blame. But you have to look at context. Right now, the most dangerous place for Jews is in Israel, and that sort of means the Zionist movement was supposed to be to make Jews safe. And when Netanyahu, goes after there was an attack that 6 people were killed by some shooters at a bus stop on Monday, and Netanyahu goes there and he just is pouring gasoline on the flames, and he's just basically manipulating it. It's horrible what he does. That, helps cause anti-Semitism. I don't want to leave the anti-Semites off the hook. But I also, for example, in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I have cousins, they were members of a synagogue, a conservative synagogue, and for years and years, literally every Friday night, there were these old guys who came there with these signs about Gaza, like, this synagogue is not perpetrating atrocities in Gaza. It's a synagogue, and so that I would say is anti-Semitic. Labeling Jews in America as responsible. You can label the government, you can label industries or firms or whatever. But then there's also much, much more anti-Semitism on the right. When the 9 people were killed at the synagogue in Pittsburgh, this person came because he was anti-immigrant, and he believed that the Jews, because they're smart, they're the ones who are coordinating all this and making immigrants come here to take over our country. There's also a guy who now lives in Oregon named Eric Ward, an African-American guy who runs something called the Western States Consortium. He does a lot of research on racism, and he says that at the base of a lot of anti-black racism, there's anti-Semitism. And part of it is that, the Jews, there's this conspiracy, and they're making their conspiracy theories that they're trying to take over the world or something like that. But I will say something. I'm sure a lot of you followed the pro-Palestinian protests on campuses in 23, 24, more so than again last year. So my critique of them is that, I'm a big tent person, and I think that if you want to affect social change, you have to have a coalition. You have to raise money, you have to bring people together. If you have to go to Democratic congressmen who can maybe change their votes. Many of these protests limited themselves by saying things like no Zionists allowed. Now, I believe that the average Jewish college student in this country skews towards social justice. And many of them were really appalled at what Israel was doing in Gaza, but they might still call themselves Zionists. So there could have been larger demonstrations. Most of these encampments had 100 people. They could have had 5,000 people. So I'm careful sometimes in using terminology that sometimes builds a wall. Like, for example, I'm not a Zionist, and in our synagogue we have a large number of young people, especially who call themselves anti-Zionist. And to me, that's legitimate. It means that they don't believe that one group of people should be privileged over another group. But if I come to someone who's a little bit more to the right of me and say I'm an anti-Zionist, the first thing is that guy's going to put all these filters on and not listen to me. Instead of saying, well, tell me what you're concerned about, or let me tell you what I'm concerned about. Now, it's a lot of work, and it's often younger people, and I know my sister, who is 85 and was a retired professor of women's history, when I offered this critique, she said, yeah, but college students don't want older people telling them what to do. So, they're not going to listen. I am against the horrible repression. I mean, the only places where there was no violence was where the presidents of the universities didn't call in the police. When police show up, it always instigates violence. And there were places where they listened to the students. There were occasionally some things that could be construed as anti-Semitic, but they were usually outsiders. But there's also, you can't argue with someone's feeling. There are Jewish students who say, I don't feel safe. Now, I've talked to some of them and I said, do you feel unsafe or do you feel uncomfortable? Someone saying they're pro-Palestinian doesn't hurt your safety. They're not attacking you. It might challenge you because you've always believed that Israel's a great place, but maybe you have to be open to being uncomfortable. How can you change? How can you learn if you don't step out of your comfort zone? And the right-wing Jewish establishment, like the American Anti-Defamation League, have capitalized this, and now everybody's talking about how there's horrible anti-Semitism everywhere. And if you poll Jewish students on campuses, the majority of them say, I feel safe. No one's ever called me a dirty Jew. And now there are professors that are being harassed because they've taken pro-Palestinian views. And of course, Trump is cutting funding because they don't like liberal education. He's just using that as an excuse. Harvard's standing up to it. But I still think that people have to be understanding of how you talk to someone in a way that gets them to listen, because there's not enough listening going on. Yes, Ellie.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm blanking. I did remember that somebody else asked another question about the food trucks. I do remember learning a bit about that before coming here.
Okay.
About how intentional some of the limiting was. There's a interesting article. Yes, that's the
Okay.
so sorry.
That's okay.
But there was an article about how they were slowly dieting Palestinian people, and I wondered how that would relate to what happened, or how that's worked, because I didn't see the article myself. I saw somebody who is much more educated than me talking about it, and I haven't gotten the chance to read it yet. So I wanted to know how much you knew about this.
About people like dying from starvation, kind of, and that.
Yeah, the famine.
The famine, sure.
Yeah, I did also learn from that video famine was a man-made thing.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, even before October 7th, there was a kind of a siege on Gaza. After there were elections, Israel used to occupy Gaza, and they didn't kick Palestinians out, but they had these there were 9,000 Jews living there, very few. And then there was this thing called the disengagement, where they just unilaterally brought all the settlers back to Israel, and then there were elections for who was going to rule Gaza, and Hamas won the elections. And it was kind of ironic. The Americans, I think it was Bush Jr. and I think Netanyahu, they said, we want to have free elections, but then when they elected Hamas, they said, well, we can't have Hamas because they're, but right after that, Israel kind of closed off the borders to Gaza. One of the borders goes into Egypt, and that was kept open, so some stuff. So even then, a lot of things weren't coming into Gaza. There wasn't starvation, but you couldn't get things that you used to get before. I mean, there were some stores just didn't have all the foodstuffs and other things. And Israel would let some in. But this is people might not know this, but there are two sort of leaderships of the Palestinian people. In the West Bank, there's something called the Palestinian Authority. And in 34 years ago, in 1992, Israel negotiated these accords called the Oslo Accords, and the idea was that they were going to give up territory, and there was going to be a Palestinian state, and they set up, and the Palestinian Authority was set up, and they had elections. But in Gaza, Hamas was sort of opposed to the Palestinian Authority, and Prime Minister Netanyahu, he didn't want a Palestinian state, and one of his policies was he tried to keep the people in Gaza separate from the people of the West Bank, and he helped support Hamas. And this Hamas, who carried out terrorist attacks, who is not interested in negotiating with Israel, he was enabling them, and he would get the country of Qatar, which Israel just bombed 2 days ago. They would send millions of dollars in cash, and this is documented, put them in suitcases, and cars from Israel would drive across the border into Gaza, and they'd give the cash to Hamas. And some of that went to people, some of that went to build their tunnels. I mean, they're not a democratic organization. They're not very peaceful, but they were helped by Israel to be a counterpoint, if you know that word, to be opposed to the West. And then Netanyahu could say, well, we can't negotiate with the Palestinians because they're not united. You've got the Palestinian Authority here and Hamas here. And his policy was what he called to manage the conflict. Hamas would send rockets, Israel would send in the Air Force, and usually it was a few days. And there were lots of Palestinians killed, but it wasn't tens of thousands. It wasn't an invasion. And this went on numerous times until October 7th. And I think Hamas, I believe in nonviolence, and I think that the armed struggle of the Palestinians has made things worse for them. There are a lot of Palestinians, we don't hear about them, who are doing all kinds of nonviolent things. They're doing nonviolent organizing, using the model of Martin Luther King and Gandhi, and they're not so much in the Gaza, but in the West Bank. But now, when Israel attacked Gaza, at the very beginning of the war, you had people in the Israeli army who said, we're not going to allow electricity, no fuel, no food, no water. They really said, we're going to starve them. It was like revenge. It was like as if everybody in Gaza was guilty of what Hamas did. There were several thousand Hamas, fighters or terrorists, however you want to call them, that came in and attacked. But Gaza has 2 million people, and those 2 million people, they're not all terrorists. Most of them don't have guns. They may have voted for Hamas, but some of them weren't even born then. We can't blame every person who voted for Trump for the horrible things that Trump's doing. So there is now starvation. It's not like tens of thousands of people are dying of starvation every day, but dozens are dying. There are a lot of kids who are malnourished. Baby formula, mothers who aren't getting enough food so they don't have a lot of milk. There's very little sanitary, so people are getting diseases. This is like 2 miles away from Israeli Jewish settlements where they have everything they need. Gaza is as far away as White Rock. That's how close it is to people in Israel. It's like you could drive there from Jerusalem in an hour. You could go there from Tel Aviv in 45 minutes. It's just quite unbelievable. And they say that about 60% of the buildings in Gaza have been destroyed or damaged, and now 63,000 people, and there's no end in sight. And I think what Israel's doing also, it's really, even if you are a protector of Israel, it's bad for Israel because Israel's being ostracized, if you know that word, they're being like isolated. People in Europe don't want to have any dealings with Israel. Young Israelis who travel abroad, they're afraid to go places because people maybe might attack them. So it's dangerous for Israelis. It's not making Israel safe. It's making Israel more vulnerable. And think of all the people who suffered in Gaza. They're not all of a sudden going to start loving Israel. You kill 10 terrorists and you create 100 more because they see their brother and sister being killed. And I really respect Palestinians who can, in all this destruction, can stand out and say, we want peace. Like this guy I mentioned, the Gaza Soup Kitchen is one of the organizations that our synagogue is hopefully going to support. They're raising money to buy food inside of Gaza. And there's a guy named Hani, Palestinian, who's now living in Washington. His brother was killed last year. His parents are living there, and they're now hosting 10 orphans whose parents have been killed. He knows some Hebrew, and he said, I'll do a Zoom call with your synagogue. He's really open, and so even in the middle of that, there's compassion, and I hope there'd be more Israelis with compassion. Did I answer you, Ellie, kind of, sort of?
Yeah, you did quite a bit.
Okay.
Thank
okay.
you.
Anybody else? Here, I haven't asked.
Are there formal conflict resolution lessons taught in your schools?
With the parents, a lot. With the parents, mostly it's the facilitators who explain how we're going to do this discussion. They do that in the classroom. I mean, sometimes it's not about Jewish-Arab conflict. It's about conflict in the classroom. What happens if there was a time, I don't know if they're still doing it in Jerusalem, where they took fourth graders, I think, and they did this thing called conflict managers, and they trained them a little bit, this group of maybe 10 or 15 of them, and they'd go out, and if there was a problem, instead of first going to the principal, they'd get them together and they'd talk about it with them. And if they had another problem, they'd go back to the principal. That goes on a lot, but I think it's part of it, just that's built into how the school runs, and it starts at a young age, so by the time the kids get to junior high and high school, they're inculcated with that pedagogy kind of.
Yeah, maybe I missed it, but do you have anything that's equivalent to PTA, teacher, parents-teacher association?
They have like a parents committee, and in Israel, the parents committee has quite a bit of clout. In Jerusalem, a representative from the parents committee is on the hiring panel that hires the principal. And we had a case in Jerusalem where we had a principal that really was not good. And there was a small group of parents that really were defending this principal. And it took a while because this person had seniority, and the parents committee got really involved and helped coax her to move to another job. The parents committees, they also do things like, organizing picnics.
Okay, so
they're
good. They help you out. Okay.
Yeah, and they it's usually try to have a mixed group of Jews and Arabs, and they will help support. They don't raise so much money, but they will do a picnic, or they need parents to chaperone a field trip. They'll do things like that. Maybe another video. Would you like to see another video, a short one? If I could. Question. I don't know how much time we have. We have a little bit of time?
Until 9 o'clock, so we've got 35 more minutes.
Okay. Can you scroll up or down? How do you? Are they all here, kind of?
Mm-hmm.
Let me see. I just forgot what you had.
This one, welcome to Hand in Hand.
Yeah, that's a good one too. This is interesting here. This
one?
This is this is 2 years old. So it's before. We started a new. In Haifa, we started with toddlers and worked our way up, and now we're up to 9th grade. But when we started the junior high is 7th, 8th, and 9th in Israel. These are the two teachers. It was just one class, and they're talking about why they're doing it. It's with subtitles. It's in Hebrew and Arabic, so you'll read the English.
ברוכים הבאים לכיתה ז' הדו-לשונית של יד ביד. שמי גיא אלוני. אנחנו נמצאים בעירוני א' בחיפה. כאן אנחנו צומחים וגדלים ולמדים, משהו מאוד מאוד מרגש בשבילנו.
أنا دعاء عودي مربية الصف السابع ثنائي اللغة الأول بحيفا.
יהודים וערבים שלומדים ביחד, מכירים אחד את השני, את השפות, את התרבויות השונות.
اللي جابنا على يد بيد هو إني كنت أدور على تغيير، محل اللي أكثر يحتوي الطالب يطلع عليه كإنسان عنده مشاعر.
דרך החינוך אנחנו יכולים ליצור דור שייצר עולם טוב יותר, שבו נוכל לחיות בשלום, בנוחות, ברווחה.
وشايف إنه كيف إحنا بحيفا مجتمع مختلط، في عنا عدة ثقافات وعايشين سوا وبنشتغل سوا، فليش لا؟ ليش ما نبلشش هذا الإشي من المدرسة؟
המטרה שלי כאן בחינוך הדו-לשוני זה להכיר לתלמידים את העולם כולו, להראות להם את השוני בין האנשים כמשהו שהוא מעצים, משהו שהוא מגדל.
هون الطالب في عنده حرية أكثر إنه يعبر عن رأيه، يحس إنه هو مهم زي أي واحد تاني، ولرأيه ولكلمته في قيمة. بعطونا اقتراحات كيف بيحبوا يتعلموا، وبنحس إنه الطلاب عندهم عن جد ثقة إنه يوقفوا يعبروا عن حالهم، يطلبوا، يحاولوا يغيروا.
אנחנו בשיעור תרבות הדת. בשיעור הזה אנחנו מקבלים כלי מחקר להבין ולפרש טקסטים של כתבי הקודש, של תרבויות שונות, ועושים ביניהם השוואה.
احنا اليوم حابين نكمل شوي اكثر عن موضوع بدايه التقويم. رح اطلب من كم حدا انهم يعطونا شوي ملخص عشان نتذكر شو حكينا بالضبط ونعرف نكمل الموضوع.
השאלה הראשונה שלנו זה בעצם מתי מתחיל כל לוח שנה ולמה, והשאלה השנייה שלנו זה אם אתם הייתם יכולים לבחור מתי אתם רוצים להתחיל את השנה, מה הייתם בוחרים ולמה.
متى يتم رسم شيء زي الخير؟ بقدر بختار أنا 4-1 عشان عيدي 4-1.
דווקא הכי מיוחד שלא תהיה משמעות בכלל.
כאילו לעשות הגרלה ואז את מה שהצמתם בכם? כן.
אנחנו מלמדים פה את מנהיגי העתיד, אנחנו מחנכים אותם לייצר שינוי, והשינוי יגיע מכאן.
احنا فعلا حاسين انه عم نبلش تغيير، صح بعدنا بالخطوات الاولى بس مأمنين كثير انه هاي الخطوات راح تزيد وراح التغيير هذا يكبر اكثر ونحس فيه اكثر بالمجتمع.
אנחנו מזמינים אתכם להצטרף אלינו, להיות חלק מהשינוי ולתמוך בנו.
In schools in Israel, religion can be part of the school. There's no separation there. So because we have Christian Arabs, Muslim Arabs, and Jews, we use the holidays especially as a real vehicle to open doors. I mean, they're all celebrated. People learn about them. Kids know which holiday is theirs, but they can share that holiday. Hanukkah is a Jewish holiday, but they can share it with their Arab friends. There are more Christian and Jewish holidays than there are Muslim holidays. And I remember at the beginning, there were these parents saying, well, there's all these vacations for the Christians and the Jews. And we said, well, you know, go change your religion. It was really funny. But Ramadan, I mean, there's also really interesting empathy. In Ramadan, even though most of our Muslim kids are not particularly religious, I mean, although you'll see mothers wearing a hijab, a lot of them, if not most of them, fast during Ramadan. You fast from sunrise to sunset. And at the beginning, I remember there were these Jewish kids who were embarrassed to eat their lunch in front of their Arab friends because they were hungry. And the Arabs would say, why should you suffer? We're suffering enough, you know. You know, and we have a complicated calendar because we want to have this a good number of school days, but we have to take time off for the different holidays. Any more questions? Yes. I can hear you.
We're recording, so I want to get your question.
All right, you had a male and a female instructors. Is that common, or is something in the culture would say that it should be 2 men together or 2 females together?
It's very common. Most of our teachers are women. I would say that probably 80% are women. A lot of classes will have, and almost all the Arab teachers are women, not all. There are a few Jewish male teachers, and you'll see a lot of classrooms that are mixed like that. And that's also a really interesting, because they have to work hard to build a cooperative model, because you don't have a lead teacher and assistant teacher. There are 2 equal teachers. And one thing that's really important to us is that we encourage the teachers to show disagreement. Not about school discipline, not about if a kid's acting out, they have to be unified, but about politics. You know, they'll talk about their stories, and they'll show, and they say, this is modeling for the kids. You guys can disagree, but you have to listen to each other and try to understand where you're coming from. What is your narrative? What is your story? What is your family background? That happens a lot. You know, sometimes they work it out. October 7th and the war in Gaza, when the teachers are together, there's a institution in Israel called the Teachers' Room, and they even refer to it as, in Hebrew, it's Chadar HaMorim, meaning, what are the teachers feeling? What's their climate? It's not just the room, it's also just their whole, but there's a teacher's room, and there's always lots of coffee and food. I mean, there's a lot of coffee drinking in schools in Israel, and when they're together having their staff meetings, there's a lot of crying and emotions, and this has gone on since the beginning, that sometimes the Jewish parents, so for Palestinians who come to our schools, it's a place where they feel empowered. In the rest of society, they often feel like second-class citizens, but in the schools, they feel that they're equal. Everything is written in Hebrew and Arabic. Try to keep the classes equal between number of Jewish and number of Arab pupils. A lot of the Jews who come, they're the white people in Israel. They feel privileged. They're the powerful group in Israel. You know, it's a Jewish government that's attacking Gaza. Sometimes they feel a little bit guilty, and the Arabs say, we don't want you to feel guilty. That doesn't help us, but we want you to understand that you got to hear my story, and you get your story told in the news all the time. You got to listen to us, and sometimes some of the Jewish parents, it's hard for them. It's like I went with my son during the Black Lives Matter protests to a meeting where they invited people who weren't part of the movement, And at the beginning, they said they asked all the non-people of color to sit on the outside of the circle. And I understood that, but it was kind of weird. You know, it's like I wanted to be in the middle of the conversation. And, you know, they said, you know, this is a black-led movement, and we're the ones who are trying to build, you know, equality. And it was interesting. But Hebrew is the dominant language. The Jewish parents don't speak Arabic for the most part. Arabs in Israel do speak Hebrew. So already there's a compromise. They're speaking in their second language, although they speak fluent. And in the schools, it's pretty bilingual, although Hebrew is probably a little bit stronger. Maybe I'll show one last kind of more emotional, just like kind of a collage of things. It's this one. No. That one, yeah. Thank you. I like that thing at the end because it says the future of all of us is here. I mean, I think that, you know, there's a slogan from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, that originated 75 years ago among right-wing Zionists that said from the river to the sea, this is our land. They wanted Israel to be from the banks of the Jordan River all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, including the West Bank. But I believe that from the river to the sea, all people should be free. It's kind of, it's, you know, it's, there's, and there, that's got to be a vision that people hold on to. We're a long ways away from it, you know. We don't, you know, we have, but there's, you know, lots of loss of life. But I'm really inspired by what the Europeans are doing. They're putting their foot down. Even Germany, which has been super reluctant to criticize Israel because of the Holocaust, they're talking about holding back arms. So that will have maybe some impact, maybe. Maybe any last questions?
I think your school is a wonderful, wonderful concept, and I'm very impressed with what you've done.
Thank you.
As a teacher myself, it's just beautiful to see. From what we've learned about a lot of the bombings in Gaza and in the West Bank, specifically with the higher education, with the colleges, what do you see as the future for these Palestinians or Arabs after graduation? Is there a future for them in higher education?
I mean, inside of Israel, yes. I mean, for Gazans, I don't know. I mean, I think that, you know, Gaza's like really, I mean, there were some, first of all, you know, a lot of Gaza was not, some of them were refugees from 1948, 1967, but many were just people who've been living there for generations in Gaza City and Khan Yunis, and there were, you know, doctors and lawyers and people at universities. They might not have been world-class universities, but they were learning physics and engineering, and most of them have been destroyed. In 3 years, nobody's been able to go to college. So I don't know there. I mean, I know that inside of Israel, Palestinians, Israelis go to Israeli universities, and that's been one positive change. And I think that Haifa University is about 30% Arab now. It's a good university. Our school students, almost all of them who graduate from our high school are headed towards secondary, post-secondary education. The West Bank, it's been really difficult. There's a big university called Bir Zayt, which is near Ramallah, in a town called Bir Zayt, which was a leading, but throughout the 1980s, the Israelis were closing it and putting curfew on it. then the Oslo Accords happened and it opened up again. It's hard. There's a shortage of doctors. Doctors have been killed, nurses. You know, the Arab world, if Israel stopped this war, the Arab world, the oil-rich countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Oman, Bahrain, they could rebuild Gaza. They could put in, it's not, you don't need $100 billion. You need $10 billion, which is like, spending money for them. I don't think they care about the Palestinians. I think the Palestinians feel like they're orphans in many ways. I think that they've used the Palestinians as a way to deflect criticism of their own countries. The rank and file maybe care about them, but the governments, they want American aid. They want Israeli technology. I mean, the United Arab Emirates signed a peace treaty with Israel. It's called the Abraham Accords, and peace treaties are better than war, but Israel's selling them, cybersecurity stuff, and I don't know whether they're not going to invest. There is talk now because Israel bombed Qatar. They killed supposedly six Hamas people. They're talking about pushing the United Arab Emirates to recall their ambassador, and the Israeli government doesn't seem to care. It's kind of like these are people in the government that just don't care. They say the world's out to we have to stand on our own feet. They hate us all. They hate the Jews. We'll do whatever we want. And unfortunately, the Americans who could have stopped most of this. I mean, I voted for Joe Biden, and he was a good president except for Palestine. He sent, huge amounts of ammunition to Israel, and they would have still attacked, but not as many people would have been killed. And he went to Israel in November after the attack, and he could have shook Netanyahu's hands, but instead he hugged Netanyahu. I think he had an emotional barrier. He just loved Israel, and he thought he just couldn't. Obama was a little bit more critical, but even Obama couldn't. So now the Republicans who don't care about Jews, they just, there's also this, I don't know if you know it, I think there's a kind of selective anti-Semitism. There are people on the hard right in this country that like certain Jews, Netanyahu, militaristic right-wing Jews. They hate liberal, elite, democratic Jews who are like at universities or learning at Harvard. So it's like, and there are these government ministers in Israel that are going out and having talks with these far-right fascists in Europe who have neo-Nazis in their group, who deny the Holocaust. And these are like Israeli Jews who are like, so it's so mixed up, so mixed up.
I will say that I think that the politicians and a lot of people in this country could learn a lot from your school.
Yeah, your school sounds like the only sane place in Israel.
Yeah. There are other, not other schools, but there are other groups that are doing good stuff. And, I don't know if we'll ever have any people come to Los Alamos, but we have some phenomenal graduates, and our high school students are really great speakers, and we're bringing them to the East Coast. But sometimes there used to be a program in New Mexico based in Santa Fe called Creativity for Peace. Have you heard of that? It was what's that? Exactly. Really, in Santa Fe? They're still, they started with, they brought young women, teenagers, Palestinians and Israelis, to come together. It was easier when they could get permits to leave. It's, harder now. But those kind of things are important. So our website is really easy. It's just handinhandk12.org, and there's a lot of videos. We do webinars. You can sign up for our mailing list, so you'll get emails. You might get asked for money. You can donate if you want. You don't have to. But we're having a webinar in October, and usually we have sometimes we have students, sometimes parents, sometimes teachers, usually a pair, Palestinian and Jewish, and we get from 100 to 200 people on the webinar. They're usually an hour. They're generally at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, so on a weekday. So it's not always the best time for people who are working, but yeah. And thank you for your work. I know this is Los Alamos, in a place where the labs are making nuclear weapons, but there's a lot of peaceniks here, and I love that. And when I was here once before, there was a guy who works in the labs, and he was like really just, organizing stuff, and it's, yeah. And New Mexico is still pretty, you said that your two senators have been part of Bernie Sanders and our junior senator, Jeff Merkley, and a senator from Maryland who are pushing to withhold. I don't know if they're talking about withholding all weapons. I think they may be talking about something more realistic. And this is crazy. I mean, not that I like her, but a few right-wing Republicans, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's not, you'd never think you'd be in bed with her, but she's come out and says there's a genocide there, and her thing is she doesn't think that Israel should dictate American foreign policy, and, if you can have it, I don't know, strange bedfellows, but. Okay, thank you.
There's some hand-in-hand handouts down
Yeah.
here and some books that you can check out, other handouts, donations. We've got a little time to chat.
Yeah, I'm happy to stay in chat.
So yeah, come down and chat with us, and thank you for coming. Thank you.